Welcome back to the Ask the Expert series. We're here to bring you top industry professionals to answer the most pressing real estate questions. My name is Mary Lou Ferry. I am your host, broker, and owner of Farley&Ferry Realty. Very important topic on lead-based rules in New Jersey and how lead-safe certificates impact real estate industry. We are thrilled to have David Sulock, the managing director at Curren Environmental, who is an environmental expert in the field for over 26 years. Plenty of experience. He will walk us through today the ins and outs of lead regulations in New Jersey. Thank you so much for joining us, David.
Happy to be here. Happy to bore you all.
Well, I don't think there's anything boring about education and learning more to be more, excel in our profession. So I'm not sure if you wanted to say a few things about yourself, and I can carry on with some questions that we have prepared.
I've been doing this actually closer to 30 some years. I'm an environmental consultant. People pay me for advice. I manage an office. There's project managers, geologists, and we do a lot of environmental work. A lot of it's tied to compliance or real estate transactions. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about is tied directly into real estate transactions. We actually have a school. We do teach. I teach nationwide for like conventions for groups and such. So I do have a lot of knowledge pertinent to what we're talking about. I couldn't tell you about roofing, airplanes, things along those lines, but environmental, I'm pretty sharp on.
Okay, that sounds perfect. So you are our top professional today, and let's talk about lead safety. Why are the rules such a critical part of real estate transactions in New Jersey?
All right, let me tell you something funny about lead in real estate. Lead was a green building product. It wasn't made by anyone. It was a natural material. And they used it in piping for like water lines, for fixtures, faucets. They also used it for like sanitation lines. Okay. Additionally, they added it. By the way, if you wanted to paint a room, okay, you want the paint to dry fast, right? You want it to be very durable, and you want it to maybe have the color pop. So what do? You add lead to it. Let's say you have a floor. You want to varnish it or stain it. You want it to dry fast, wear like iron, yada yada. You add lead to it. It was very, very inexpensive. There used to be a company called National Lead. So lead was banned in 1978. So all these older properties have lead in them in one way, shape, or form because it was just so ubiquitous. Okay. They didn't realize it was really completely that bad for her. If they did kind of know, they didn't really say it until 78. If you had and here's something funny, older homes, higher probability. You take a brand new home today, it's brand new construction, there's no lead in it until you move into the house. Why? Maybe you bring a piece of your grandmother's old furniture that has like a lead varnish on it. Maybe you have some old toys from like the 60s that could have lead in it. You bought some pottery that was made in Thailand that has a beautiful popping glaze to it, which has lead in it because it gives that vibrant color. So you can still get lead today in products that are made overseas, but it's it's something that's built into older homes that you have that you don't realize it. And what you're aware of with lead, if you've been a realtor for say 20 years, you know Title X, right? Title 10, which basically said if you're buying my house, there's a disclosure I'm going to give you if I know about any lead in the house. Never happened, right? You never see that because no one really knows. And something funny about lead in real estate, you all know about asbestos. Asbestos boomed in the 80s and 90s because they managed it or removed it as they were legally required to do in public places like at schools. Like all the schools you come across that they say they have lead in there, I'm not lead, they have asbestos. They always had asbestos. The law said either remove it or manage it. Well, if they left it there, they mismanaged it. That's why there's a mold problem. I mean, not a mold problem, a asbestos problem. But you move into lead, okay, and because asbestos was kind of dying, they had some regulations for lead, and they thought lead was going to kind of boom, but it never did because to manage lead, if it's on your trim, you got to strip it off or get rid of the trim. If it's on walls, you have to put a sealant on it. It was very, very expensive to do, and it never really took off. Okay. They were hoping that it would, environmental companies and the government, because lead is very much a hazard. Our bodies aren't designed to process it. It really affects younger kids for life. it stays in the bloodstream. It hurts their organs. They're going to have attention deficit disorder. There's many studies that show lead is very detrimental to humans, and so much more for younger children because they're developing and they're processing stuff so much faster. So it's basically a kind of a hidden danger. But I'll tell you what, the two things I think most dangerous in a home really are radon, because you can't smell or taste it, and I think it's lead. And I say this for children because you're not picking it up. You don't know they're being exposed to it until it's too late, until they start acting funny, and you go to the doctor, they do a blood test, and they're like, "Oh, this child has been exposed to lead. They have an elevated lead blood count." Because you don't realize. Because just so you know, lead does taste sweet. So if you're a little kid crawling on around somewhere and they put their hands in their mouth and are sucking on it, it tastes sweet because it's called sugar of lead. This is what they add to like paint and the varnishes. So you don't realize they're ingesting that and it's causing harm. So that like in real estate, it's always there. The government tried to regulate it with Title X. It never really took off. And now you have states like New Jersey passing these laws. And just, Philadelphia's had a similar law for like 7 years. Lancaster, Pennsylvania has it. Like there's little pockets throughout the US that have it. New Jersey wanted to be in the forefront of lead and basically swiped a broad brushstroke and said the entire state, we're going to pass this legislation. But really, they passed three laws in New Jersey. One, you know how they're digging up all the roads in New Jersey, right? They're
Sure.
right. Well, you're like, why are they doing that? Because the governor passed a law saying all the water utilities that have leaded water mains have to replace them, and they have 10 years to do it, and they're allowed to raise our rates to actually pay for it. So that's one. The other one you probably know about is the disclosure on now it's a new disclosure piece for real estate saying, or is the owner aware of any lead in the piping inside the house? Okay, so those were two laws relating to water because 20% of lead poisoning comes from drinking water. That's what they're saying nationally. That's what the EPA has down. The third law is this lead safe law that's affecting rentals. Okay, and
Right.
they've changed the law back in September, and they've tweaked like their interpretation of how the law is implemented. So there's a lot of questions that kind of go along with it, and it is really a moving target. But just for your own water, you can contact the water utility, and they can let you know if they've replaced the service line. But I'll tell you something interesting. I find this stuff interesting. The interesting thing about this law for replacing the water lines is, New Jersey American Water, they own the water line in the street. Back in the day when it was New Jersey American Water, it was Dave's Water Company, whatever. We actually also ran the water line into your house and we owned it, right? And now what they're discovering is because these old lines actually were owned by the water utility and they acquired it through acquisition after acquisition. There are some towns where they're replacing not just the water line, but the water service line into your dwelling, which is kind of a win because it's a few $1,000s if you had to replace your water line.
Totally. Well, I'm learning already. I never heard that lead-based paint was sweet. That's
Yeah,
very interesting.
they called it sugar of lead. And just, like school buses used to be painted with lead paint because it was vibrant. Water towers today, bridges, they still use lead paint because they've only banned it on consumer products, right? Not on industrial use. So it's still out there. And really on the roads, the striping used to be lead because it resists water, it dries fast. If you and I are striping a road, we want it to dry fast because people are going to drive over it.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. Let's dive into the lead safe certificate. What exactly is it and who needs it? And when did it become, was it started in New Jersey?
Sure.
That certificate is definitely a very important topic for everyone to understand.
The law was passed, and I'm not going to say secretly, but they didn't really do a lot of public notification on it in November of 21. And the implementation date was July 22nd of 2022. And what that means was, as of July 22nd, 2022, rental properties rental properties that were built for 1978 that have not gone through like a lead-free certification and that are rented for more than 6 months are subject to this law. And it could be a single family home, could be a multi-family dwelling, could be 3 or 4 units, even condo complexes can be subject to it. There are some exemptions, okay, but for the most part, if you're renting a property built for 78, you're more than likely subject to it. Okay, so the law said after July 22nd, Once a tenant leaves, you must have an inspection performed to get a lead safe certificate. Okay. And originally they gave you 2 years to get it done. Okay. And they've amended that in September to add another year. So the deadline is actually July 22nd of this year that you have to get your first inspection done. So if you had someone who left, within a year of the law, you had to get it inspected because tenant vacancy triggers it. Okay. But if you have someone who's like, I have some old people here, they're going to die in this place. They've been tenants for 10 years. They're going to be here for 10 years. They're not leaving. You have until July of next year to get it done. The reason they extended the deadline, they gave you another year, is because so many properties didn't get done. And 2 years was kind of an arbitrary amount of time, especially in my opinion, because Philadelphia has a law that says you need a reinspection every 5 years. New Jersey said originally your inspection is good for 2 years. So I lead safe cert you today. It was good for another 2 years. Now they've said it's actually good for 3 years. So every lead safe cert, once you get it, is good for 3 years, which means you get your lead safe inspection it's into perpetuity. It never ever ends that you have to do it. And someone asked me this morning, why would you, if I lead safe this building, why do I have to get it re-inspected? And I said, because you're inspecting the surfaces, the painted surfaces, the floors, the ceiling. They can get damaged, water damage, wear and tear, and you can get deteriorated, damaged paint that can liberate lead dust, and it's considered not a lead safe environment. So you would have to get it re-inspected because we're humans. We beat things up is what it comes down to. And this law goes after rental properties because you have to realize with rental, I have a rental property, I rent it to you, and you move out after a year. And before you moved in, I painted it. And I come in after you leave, and I'm like, oh my God, the heck did they do to this place? It's really beat up. Are they playing pickleball in here? Right? Things are chipped, the walls are damaged. I'm like, I'm not gonna be able to rent this. And I know even if you didn't beat it up that much, I know I have to make it look a little bit nicer because it'll rent faster and I'll get more money for it. So rentals historically tend to get more touch-ups of paint. Okay. If it was my house and there was some damaged paint on the wall, maybe this Saturday I would fix it. But in reality, I'm probably going to fix it in 3 months after it really, really bothers me. Okay. Tenants are not going to be like, I'm going to touch up this paint. Okay. So like my house gets fewer coats of paint than a rental property would. So it builds up and builds up. And what happens is because there's so much paint there and you maybe have so many coats of paint on top of the lead paint, some services cannot handle all that, where doors get, more coated. Like if you go to Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace Hardware, you'll see a paint roller that's about the size of my finger. People don't realize what that paint roller is for, but it's for a door. It's meant to put a very thin coat of paint on the door. Whereas people use a brush or a big roller. So you're putting on layers upon layers on that door, and eventually the door is going to rub because it's going to expand and contract. And it's going to remove the latex paint on top and get down to the leaded paint where it's going to be released. And it's in a doorway. And that's where they have found people or children get exposed to lead. If you have a child who has lead poisoning, they find that out by going to the doctor. They do a blood test. A kid does not want to get a needle, but they're like, it's an elevated lead blood count. You brought your child in, the child was acting erratically, having issues. It's lead poisoning. Board of Health gets notified, and they come in and they backward trace this to be like, okay, well, where does this child spend their time? Well, a lot of the time spent inside the house, but maybe they go to their grandmother's house and they have old toys from the 50s that have lead in them. The father works in a automotive garage and there's leaded brake pads and maybe bringing some lead dust in. The wife works at a jewelry store and they do some lead soldering on things. Okay. So they backwards trace things to figure out where it's actually coming from. What they're finding is, for the most part, it's simply coming from the dwelling. It's coming from the house because you're spending a lot of time there. So the lead safe cert is required on these rental properties to do it. Okay. And something funny about it is on the lead safe cert, it says you have to affix that to the lease. Okay. Prior to this little amendment they did in September, if I had an existing tenant and I did a lead safe inspection, I'm supposed to give them a new copy of the lease and affix it to it. They've now taken that away and said the current resident doesn't need to get a copy of that. The next tenant does. Okay. Although the new tenant can actually do an Oprah with the town and get a copy of it, because every lead safe cert goes to the town, and the town is supposed to notify the state that these properties actually have it. But this whole lead safe certificate is going to get in the hands, in the eyesight of tenants who will eventually become homeowners and have some lead knowledge. And I will tell you, we've done lead inspections for like commercial demolition properties where you have to do it because they're demolishing it. They have to get rid of the asbestos, the lead, right? I've had more people in the past 2 years ask me about lead inspections on residential homes they're buying to live in, more in the past 2 years than the past 10 years, because people are becoming more aware. And that was one of the goals of this law and this lead safe certificate, that it's to notify people of these dangers of lead. Because again, the Title X, Title 10, whatever you want to call it, really people just kind of laughed it off. Like if you rented a property in New York City, it's like 10 pages of like lead disclosure on a rental, because it's a really old city, lots of old coats of paint on it. New Jersey was kind of lax in that. And we have a lot of we have towns, pretty much as old as, New York, where the kids have had lead poisoning to it. So the governor saw it fit to actually pass this law to go after these rental properties, knowing that it's probably going to impact some commercial properties. Like we had some people buying an old house in Ocean City, right? They wanted to do an inspection on it for lead. Like you would never like if you asked me 5 years ago if someone's going to ask for that, I'm like, nah, no one's going to ask for that, but they do. All right. So do we want to get into how the lead safe? How do you get the lead safe certificate?
Yeah, what we wanted to dive into is the process of attaining the certificate in New Jersey. How long does it take? What's the procedure so our colleagues are aware, and start to finish, maybe the timeline. I guess there's estimates involved, and
Sure.
um,
All right. Well, just there's two types of certificates you can get. One is lead safe, one is lead free. Okay. I'm going to talk about lead safe first. Okay. Because it's protective of tenants. Okay. The lead safe inspection entails the interior of the dwelling, any place the tenant has access to. Okay. So the tenant can go into the basement, that's an inspection. If the tenant can go into an attic, that's an inspection. Okay. The outside of the house could be falling apart. The front porch, the open front porch, which is not heated or cooled, could have chipping paint. That's not part of the inspection. The inspection begins as soon as you walk through the front door. Okay. The basis of the inspection is that the state is presuming that since the dwelling was built before 1978, it has lead paint. So technically, you're not doing any testing. You're doing what is in my industry as a lead inspector is called a risk assessment. I am going around and I'm looking to make sure that all the paint is intact. It is not deteriorated. And by HUD and EPA definition, that is peeling, flaking, chalking, damaged paint. Okay. A hole in the wall would be damaged paint. A door that's painted white, I see green coming through because it's chipped off, is damaged paint. The area behind an old radiator that you never can get to where the paint's peeling, that's damaged paint. Someone paints a doorknob or a hinge and it's white, but I can see a different color, that's damaged paint. All that would be considered a fail. You're also supposed to look for like a risk assessment. You look for teeth marks too. Like because kids will chew anything on a windowsill to see if there's actually teeth marks on something. But the lead safe is based on an inspection, and that is 100% of the properties in New Jersey that are rentals have to have that. Okay. What and some towns, Cape May Courthouse, Gloucester City, Camden, I believe Ventnor City, have to have a visual assessment and also dust wipe sampling, because these towns have had a percentage of the children that have had an elevated lead blood count. Okay. Interestingly enough, Atlantic City, an older housing stock, does not have that. Okay. Egg Harbor City does. Egg Harbor Township doesn't because it's newer housing stock. So what that entails is now you're testing areas. Okay. And you're taking 8 samples. Like let's just say you had a 2-bedroom house, right? The smallest bedroom is where the kid's going to live. You're going to sample, you're going to take dust wipe sampling, which is almost like a towelette that you would use after you ate like buffalo wings or something, except there's no aloe in it because aloe will Well, the aloe plant extracts metals out of the ground. Like if you want to remediate metals out of the ground, you can plant shrubs and such, and they extract the metals. So they're called like ghost wipes. There's nothing in them. So you wipe these areas. And for the kids' room, you would sample like the windowsill, and you would do the floor where a door opens because they're expecting that the windowsill is going to have a friction surface of the windows gliding up and down, and a door is going to rub. So you sample that, and you would repeat that because the kid wakes up, has to go to the bathroom. So you would do a windowsill in the bathroom there. Kid has to eat. Now you're going into the kitchen, doing a windowsill on the floor. Right there, you have 3 rooms. That's 6 samples. The other 2 are typically family room, you know, or if the family room and the kitchen are kind of the same, maybe the parents' room. But you're going to collect these samples. Standards are ungodly low, high risk of failing for people. Okay. So, I tell people you really need to clean these units and walk through these units because the law allows you to maintain your unit. Okay. So the lead safe inspection is 100% visual of all properties, and certain municipalities you have to do dust wipe sampling, which makes it more expensive, and you're delayed in getting your lead safe certificate because now you're going to a lab. Like if we did a property today, it would go to the lab and I get the results in about 2 days. I got to view the data. I cross my fingers that you passed. If you pass, then you get the lead safe cert. All right. Um, Otherwise, typically if you inspected today and you were good, you would get your lead safe cert via email within 24 to 48 hours because the inspector has to come back to the office to do it. A lot of times people don't do that. So the turnaround on these things is pretty quick. And you get this lead safe cert and you're like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? What are my obligations? Well, you're the landlord. You got to make sure you affix this to the lease for the next tenant. You also have to give a copy to the town, and the town's going to charge you. There's a $20 state fee that the state collects, and that money goes into a fund to help pay for sites that have damaged paint that the landlord can't do it. It also pays for lead education. Most towns are charging $50 to $70 on top of that for their processing and handling of it. All right. That's it kind of in a nutshell. And I told you about 2 types. There's also a lead free. Lead free would be you telling me, Dave, I got hit by Superstorm Sandy. We gutted everything. And I mean, we could see through all the rooms. It was just wood studs, the ceiling, everything was down. We replaced everything. Okay. We walk in with like a $28,000 gun. It's called a gun. And we go around and we check services. Typical 3-bedroom house, you'd have 300 plus or minus because you're testing everything, every wall, every piece of trim on every wall, every ceiling every closet's its own room. So you collect all this and you know instantly if there's lead. All right. So if everything is like there's nothing there, you get what's known as lead free, and you're exempt from the law because the law presumes you have lead paint. By going lead free, you're proving that you don't on all these surfaces. And I will tell you, depending on the home and what I see in the house, maybe you did everything, but you didn't do the vestibule, or you didn't do the ceiling because you put sheetrock on top of the old plaster, or you didn't replace the stairs and the stairs have a lead stain or varnish on them. You didn't replace the backs of the closets. There's certain areas where people think they gutted everything and they didn't, and we find it. Or you get a radiator, you know, no one's taking that radiator someplace and stripping. I had a friend who took his radiator and took a sandblaster that he rented, and dust was flying everywhere. And he's like, no paint ever even came off of it. They had to take it somewhere industrial to actually strip it up there. So lead free is a unicorn that you might be able to get, but it really depends on really what was done to it. And I will tell you, if you're in real estate, everyone will tell you I gutted the place. And like gutting to me means it's just wood studs. It's wood studs plumbing. That's what I'm saying. And that's not what gutting is for everybody. And God forbid if you walked in it while they were gutting it, you're inhaling a bunch of asbestos and lead dust because it was on the walls.
Wow.
How's that for like, right?
Lots of information. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there about lead-based today and the safety. So as far as the regulations are concerned in New Jersey, what should real estate agents and homeowners really know? What are those, there's just so much information out there. What should we really be aware of, and what's, a red flag, and where do we need to be cautious? And
Sure. Okay, first off, I tell everyone well, first off, if you did a lead inspection of my house, I would fail. Okay. My wife has an office and there's some chip paint on the trim. I don't feel like pulling all our stuff out of there and painting it. And I actually tried to touch up a couple areas, but I don't have the same color white, so I stopped. So my house, because I live in it, would fail. So I tell everyone, walk through the property before you get the inspection done to make sure everything is intact. And also to look at things to be like, you know what? This is kind of damaged. This is not going to keep it allowing paint to be adhered to it. We should replace it. Which you're like, that sounds like a lot. And I'm like, it is a lot, but adhering to this law is rather strict. Okay. And let me tell you something. They amended the law in September. Okay. They're now keeping track of all the properties that have failed an inspection. Because if you fail, you have 30 days to fix the problem. Now you're going on a naughty list. Okay. Now you're on the naughty list. You know, what they're going to tell you is because the governor wants to say we had 17,000 properties that had lead hazards and we fixed them, which is great for the numbers. On the flip side, you're on a list where you're a slumlord and you failed, which tells me if I was going to inspect your property, I'm going to inspect it a little stricter if I have other inspections to go on there because you're on the naughty list. Okay. Because if you fail an inspection, you have to fix it. So you're better to fix it ahead of time. Okay. So like if you replace, if you're going to replace windows, I would probably replace the windowsill because the windowsill is most likely going to have it. Because what I didn't say to you about lead paint is that it also resists moisture. So it's very common on trim and on windows because you leave the window open, water lands on it. Okay. Having lead in the paint is going to make it more durable. So that's a common area. You might have doors that have been coated and they stick and they stick. Like I had one house, they just painted it. We opened up the basement door, which apparently tends to get the most paint of any door in the house, and the paint just flew off. And the guy was there. He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm just opening the door, right?" But it couldn't handle it. So you really have, you know, maybe you have to actually get rid of that door or have it dip somewhere or to, you know, remove layers, you know, adjust it so it's not going to rub. And a door that's going to rub in the summertime may not rub in the wintertime. So you have to take it as to when it might be occurring. And let me tell you, some of them you may just need to adjust the hinge on it. But I do find doors have many coats on there. Um, so I mean, if you have a house that you're going to renovate, people don't realize this, but you kind of want to know if there's lead in there because when you're renovating, you're creating dust. And as we all know from the pandemic, people don't know how to wear a mask. If you're a male and you have facial hair and you put a mask on, it's not sealing it. So you go into a space and you're renovating and there's dust going, you're going to be inhaling it. It's going to be getting on your person, on your clothing. People don't realize that they're touching the hazard and it's messing with them. You know, a funny thing, which I didn't talk to you about water, but Ben Franklin knew lead was an issue. Back in the day, they didn't have, you know, New Jersey American Water. They basically had a drum, a bucket, a barrel, and they collected rainwater. And that's how they got their drinking water. So you wonder why people only lived to be 30 or 40 years old back then, right? It was rougher. Well, anyway, he knew a family who had a lead roof and they acted kind of weird. And he correlated that to lead leaching out of the rainwater as they were drinking. And if you Alice in Wonderland, the Mad Hatter, you know, metals are bad. You know, if it's not in a central multivitamin, the metal's not good for you. I can tell you that right now. Okay, but people don't realize that. So if you have people who are buying or selling a property, like I have people ask me, they're buying an old house, and I'm like, dude, house built in 1940, 100% you have lead in there. It's like, well, I don't want to buy it then. I'm like, are you crazy? Like, it's a beautiful house, but like, you got to be able to manage it. And he's like, well, I might want to renovate it. And I'm like, okay, well, rather than you ask me to go inspect the property today and tell you where lead is, because you're not going to get a discount on the house. I said, bring me in after you buy it and say, Dave, I'm going to take down this wall, this. I'll test it and I'll tell you if there's lead or not. If there is, certainly you want the contractor to do the proper thing because you don't want to create a lead unsafe environment. You don't want all the dust, you know, spreading throughout the house. Like if you know anyone who's like friend of mine had this kitchen redone, right? And it was all done, it was beautiful. He cleaned everything up. About 2 weeks later, he realized there was a layer of dust that settled over everything because it was suspended in the air. It was really, really small. Okay. And I said, that's how lead dust is, because lead in itself, lead dust, you throw it up in the air, it drops to the ground like instantly. You attach that to some building material, it can kind of stay airborne and floating around, and you're going to be inhaling it and you're coming across it when you do renovations. So it's really when you're renovating that you want to be careful that you're not exposing your family to it. Also, never drink warm water out of the tap because warm water tends to leach um, lead out of it, quite frankly. And really, in 10 years, there shouldn't, actually 8 years now, there shouldn't be any wet leaded water lines in the street any longer. And you might be like, Dave, I tested my water. I was one of those freaks who tested my water and my house is leaded pipes. What am I going to do? Do I need an expensive filter? And I would say no. I would say you'd get most of your drinking water from the kitchen. I would say just turn the water on, let it flush for like a minute, so you get the water that from the street, not the water that's been sitting in your service line overnight. So that's a health tip. Yeah.
Well, with 26 years of experience in this industry, you must have all kinds of different scenarios. But basically, you're saying don't be intimidated by older homes. It's just, work with caution when you're renovating.
Complete. Look, you buy it, you sell me a brand new home. I go to an antique store and I put a corner cabinet in that's just beautiful, and it's from 1800 or 19. There's lead in there. It's lead. I have people who have these bookshelves, and it's a kind of a glass you can't really see. There's lead in the glass. Yeah. Put it this way: there are more chemicals in your house that if you mix them together and drank them, you would die. Okay. So it's like in my industry, it's an exposure pathway. If there's lead on the wall behind me, okay, I'd have to lick that for an hour to come in contact with it, which I'm not going to do. Okay. But for my children, okay, um, I want to maybe monitor them and make sure that if they're in a room and there's lead in it, or if the paint does get damaged, that it kind of gets contained. And there's lead dust wipes you can buy that are magnets to be picking up dust, but it's managing the surface so you're not being exposed to it. I mean, I've never seen anyone adjust for it, quite frankly. And I've been doing this just a long time. It's just, if you don't want it, it's like buying a newer home. Everyone's like, but I want character. And I'm like, dude, character is lead, it's asbestos. That's character, you know? So people are concerned about it, but I'm like, you just came back from McDonald's. I see Doritos in the cabinet. Like, you want to be healthful for your family. It starts taking the clothing off the Peloton and using it. I'm more of a real. I'm a bit of a hammer.
Okay, so as far as the process is concerned, someone finds lead-based paint in the property, they call you in, your team comes in, and then they analyze the unit, and basically you provide an estimate or a
We actually, let me tell
recommendation.
you, there's you would. This is going to spark more people. For you to manage lead paint, you're supposed to hire a renovation repair contractor. It's basically a painter who took an EPA training class that says, okay, I'm going to put plastic down in the room. I'm going to build a decon area outside the room. I'm going to come in. This is going to sound crazy. I'm going to wet sand the area. I'm going to capture that water, put it into a bucket, and then I'm going to put it down the toilet. Okay. I'm going to put a stabilizing coat on there. Then I'm going to put another coat of paint on top of there. Painters can actually address these lead hazards. Okay. And then, you're doing all this and you have this plastic down. You roll up the plastic, and then you're supposed to HEPA vac the room and the surfaces. Then you're supposed to wet wipe them. Then you're supposed to HEPA vac them. It's very tedious. Back when Title X came out, everyone thought it was a money grab, but that's how you kind of manage it, because it's really hard to see the dust. So you can manage it by, it's called an interim control, which is stabilizing the paint so it's no longer damaged, and it will allow a top coat to adhere to it. Or you put you can put like a wall on top of the other wall, and it's supposed to have a 20-year life expectancy. Like, if you read about how people manage lead, it's insane. There's a reason why it is not like taken off in the industry. So we give guidance. We don't really. I think. Let me tell you, I know a lot of people in the lead industry, and they've been lead poisoned. they'll say compost instead of composite, like they're brain damaged from being exposed to it. It's really, really bad. I gotta tell you. And you're not being exposed to that much, but if you're in the industry, very much so you are, you know. But here's something interesting for you to know. I have a rental property. I've rented it and I have a lead safe cert going back 6 years. Everything's great. I want to sell it. Well, I have to disclose this to the buyer. Okay. Now the buyer might be like, Dave, I'm not going to rent this. I'm going to live there. That ends all the inspections. This law is only for like rental properties. Additionally, I have a duplex. I live on one side and the other side I rent, and it's had the same paint, everything for years. The law doesn't make me have to do mine. They say I can die of lead poisoning in mine, but I must do my tenant. So it's the law is it's not really protective of people in real estate, okay, or buyers in real estate. The law is very protective of tenancy.
So, I just would like to, if you could refresh us a little bit more about the rental situation and the certificate that's required, and how we can share, with our clients the requirements and, maybe some scenarios that you've had with rental situations. Because we do a lot of rentals on and off the island, and
Sure.
it is a requirement and becomes a little cumbersome. So if we could have a clear understanding of how we go about and get those certificates and rentals, that would be huge.
All right. The easiest one is when no one's in the home. It's vacant because it's all clean. It's easy to get the inspection done. And if there is something wrong with it, the owner can address it before the inspection occurs. But let's just say I was inspecting your property. I walk through the front door. As soon as I walk through the front door, I'm looking at the threshold and the door jamb, making sure nothing's damaged. I go around every room in a 360. I look at floors, trim, wall, ceiling. I look at the windows. I look in the closets. And I do that across every room and in hallways. Common areas where people fail, doorways, because tenants don't hire movers, they hire friends they give beer and pizza to, and they're a little rougher in carrying stuff in and out of a narrow doorway. Backs of closets, because people tend to throw stuff back there. Bathrooms, ceilings, because they don't use the exhaust fan, so it gets a lot of moisture, so it starts to peel. Same thing on windowsills. If you have radiators, that's a very, very common area. The backs of doors, because a tenant or someone will put a shoe rack on there and the shoe rack bangs and will start chipping off the paint. Those are all fails. I tell people that you may have an ugly, green paint. You're not going to fail for that. But you're going to fail if the green paint is chipping and I see white or yellow underneath it. That's going to be a fail for you. That everything has to look like it doesn't need a touch up. And I will tell you from experience, most properties need maybe 30 brush strokes here and there. Okay, you're not going to fail for a water stain because it's a water stain. It's not damaged paint. You're not going to fail for a bad spackling job that it doesn't look even or it looks rough. But you're going to fail for a hole in the wall. You're going to fail for something. If I took my fingernail to it and I could chip off more paint, you would fail for that. You don't fail for nail holes. You might have 20 nail holes on a wall. It just says you're terrible at hanging pictures. That's not really deteriorated paint. Okay. But I mean, if you had a tenant who hung things up and they use like the 3M sticky tape, that's not supposed to be damaging to paint, but you peel it off and now there's a big blotch of like the paint from like 3 coats of paint, you would fail for that. It's a very, very nitpicky law, but you wouldn't fail if it was touched up. And you might be like, Dave, the wall's white or it's gray and I use a different colored gray and it looks silly. It looks like a dotted wall. And I'm like, that's okay. If it doesn't bother you, it's in compliance with the law. I tell people I had one where the landlord had painted the whole place, but the tenant had to get in. And he said, I let the tenant move in early, right? Well, he failed. And he's like, how? And he came through. He couldn't believe like the hallway was dinged up. Like the tenant just was really rough in carrying everything in the place and they failed. And I said, no good deed goes unpunished. I said, everything was perfect up until the tenant moving in. And now they had things disturbed, or the landlord said, I have an older couple. They've been there a while. I looked at the house. Everything is great. And they've had the tenant, they moved out, right? We go in there and it's like everything he couldn't see behind a dresser or like a good spot. The Harry Potter closet under the stairs tends to be beat up because you might look there's a hole in the wall where you peek your head in there and you look up and they didn't paint over there because no one sees that. Or you go into a closet and you look up above your head and it's damaged there because people didn't paint it or it wore off. Like people just throw crap in closets and it tends to get beat up and you don't see it when it's occupied. So, I tell people you really want to walk through it before we do it because you may need to touch up, certain areas. I've seen so many things, like I tell people, if it looks like you need to do a couple brush strokes, you're going to fail. Because if you painted the place, everything would be contiguous, right? Everything would look fresh. And that's what they're kind of asking you to do. Okay. Now you might have some wallpaper that's peeling. You could imagine a house still has wallpaper. That's not going to fail you. Okay. But here's something I did not tell you. Okay. When they amended the law in September, right? Let's say you have two units, one upstairs, one downstairs, but there's a common hallway that people use. Okay. Well, the two units each need a lead safe certificate. So does the hallway. Okay. And you want them all to have their own lead safe certificates. It's required by law, although I am dealing with DCA to make sure that that is the proper, not just interpretation, but enforcement of the law, because you may be having tenants, vacate. And if it's tenant vacates and that certificate is tied to the hallway, you need to inspect the hallway and their unit. So the idea is the hallway should be good for, it should have its own because it's going to be reduced from having to get additional inspections done for it. Because I'm just like, let's say you have one lead safe certificate that was 2 years old, and so that's only good for another year, right? You may have to, if that was tied to the unit, you would have to get that inspected again in a year because it ends in 3. Whereas the hallway was done because the law just changed in September. Maybe you get a lead safe cert, in October. That's good for 3 more years of inspections. So they're trying to segregate these things because they don't want a certain area to be tied to a given space. And let me tell you, that was my emails to DCA last week because I have a number of properties where there's little vestibules and people have to enter it. And it's like, I can't tie it to, I don't want to tie it to any one unit. It gets its own lead safe certificate. It's like and just, New Jersey passed the law. Department of Community Affairs, DCA, is enforcing it. Okay. And it's their interpretation of how to enforce it. Okay. But on a local level, they said every municipality has to manage this. And trust me, the municipality was like, is there a form? Is there anything you can give us to follow? You'll figure it out. You're just going to push that button that's going to notify every landlord in your town that they're subject to this law, and then push it again when it needs for reinspection. They're so ill prepared. Okay. And I'll tell you a funny story, which isn't even funny. Haddonfield, New Jersey passed a law in December of 2023 that said the certificate is not good for 3 years. It's good. It can last 3 years, but if a tenant vacates after a year, you must get another inspection. Yes. And I notified DCA, and DCA is speaking to the state attorneys to speak to Haddonfield to see if that's even legal because they're making the law stricter. And Haddonfield's interpretation was not me, asking the politicians. My interpretation is they have people who are there for the school system and they're renting a property and they know that people are going to beat up on the property and they want to have this inspected at every tenant vacancy to make sure the paint is not damaged. But they're making the law stricter. Philadelphia's every 5 years. So you have some towns, and the funny thing was, I challenged them. I said, "There's no way they pass this law. No way, because you got to make the law right, and then you have to have a public hearing, and there's always crazies that come out, right? but they did it in November and they did it again in December. So you probably have less crazies and it passed. Right. So, I mean, I have
Wow.
towns that are asking this to be done. And I'm like, show me where that law is because you're making the state law stricter and most people aren't going to do that. How do you like that? That's bad news, isn't it?
I mean, that's crazy. Haddonfield is a charming older town, so I'm sure there's, many properties that they were targeting, as far as the lead base is concerned. Do you have any, averages, like, for example, two-bedroom apartment, to do an inspection? And is there a range I'm sure there's a million different scenarios, but is there something standard on a property that's, basically maintained?
Are you talking cost wise?
Yes.
Yeah, they're typically around 200 to 225, like per unit.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, there's a couple rubs there. Okay. The hardest part for us is getting inside the unit. And you're like, how can that be? There's a lockbox. The key's gone. Someone took it. Wrong lockbox code. And like we started our first inspection, say 8 o'clock. No one's calling us. So they have like a 15-minute window. They're going to hang out and wait. Oh, the unit is occupied. The tenant's going to let you in. All right, today is Tuesday, right? We're going to be there Friday. The tenant forgot they had a medical emergency. They're not letting us in. Or the better one is the tenant's peeking out the window looking at us, but not coming to the door, right? And quite frankly, it's best if someone meets us there because people come up to the door in their underwear, let us in, and go back into bed. It's really weird. It's really one. It's some of the people think it's some of the worst inspections they do on occupied dwellings. I got to tell you. Okay. Now on the flip side, if you have an area where you have to do dust wipe sampling, you're probably more around $425 to get the inspection done because you're analyzing 9 samples. They got to run it to the lab, and there's a little more paperwork, involved for it. But I mean, at least we try to do it. We try to do it fairly. Again, you could be sitting outside half an hour waiting for someone to get there, and that's just it screws up all the other inspections throughout the day. So they might charge you for the inspection because they had to leave because the people wouldn't let us in. you know. And there's a lot of properties we get in on. You just remember the ones that you can't get inside on. Or everyone's like, I'm going to meet you there. And then something happens like, oh, it was really cold out. I didn't think you were going to do it today. Yeah.
Well, we enjoy some of those same experiences well, but not, of course, with the Farley and Ferry tenancies. I mean, we definitely make sure that they comply and help out our lead-based paint inspectors.
I'm sure I,
Yeah.
I have to share it all with you. It's a small percentage, but it's like we have a weekly meeting and you just talk about stuff. And like, can you believe that guy did like this and that? And like, you know, I'm sorry, just someone peeking out the window. The curtain's going like this and that. And I'm like, was it a dog? They're like, no, a dog would put his face out and look at you. No, it was a human. We take it with a grain of salt. But I mean, for the record, too, we have 5 people doing these, so they're constantly doing them and they're doing other stuff. So they try to coordinate it um, because I mean, and just too, the law went into effect July of 2022. If you have an older couple that are going to live there and they have been living there, they're not leaving. You have until this July to get it done. All right. Some of the towns are forcing people to get it done sooner, but yeah, you do have until July, but it also gives you opportunity to go into the unit, maybe replace the smoke detector batteries or the carbon monoxide. Those things, the batteries don't last forever, nor do they last forever. So it might give you a chance to go in and take a look around and see if something needs to be touched up, you know. And I tell people, send me a picture if you want me to. I don't need to know the address. We want to know if something looks damaged or not. But I said, in your heart, if you think it needs to be touched up, it's damaged paint. You got a soul search.
So let me just ask you a little bit about some of the properties that are built prior to 1978 and the owner is renting the unit as a yearly rental. We need the lead-based certificate for the CO for the municipality because the municipality won't release a CO unless that inspection is finalized. So of course there's some exemptions to that, but we do need the lead-based paint for yearly rentals, correct? That are built prior to 1978.
The certificate on it, it used to say 2 years. Now it says 3 years. Okay. So if you have a municipality where they're telling you need to get it every year, If the cert is still valid, it should still be valid. All right. And if you have an issue with it, I'd love to know because I'd love to speak to them. I'd love to notify DCA. Um, unless the town has passed an ordinance requiring it at every CO inspection or every year, it's the certificate is good for 3 years. And this is covered, we get paid to do inspections. Okay. So Hanfield's like, hey, you have to do it every time a tenant leaves, you know? I'm like, that's not fair, but it's more business for us. And I'm actively dealing with DCA saying, this is madness. This isn't fair, you know? So what you're saying, I think, is a misinterpretation of it by the municipality because um, they've gotten so little information from DCA on how to manage it. Okay. The way these inspections work, um, the town can train someone for like 2 hours. They can take this training and the town person can do it. I know I Cherry Hill, a friend of mine is the it works for the fire department there. And he's like, they offered to have us trained to do this. Like, we don't want to do that. We don't want the responsibility. And he's like, you need 40 hours of training. And you got to take 2 different tests to do it. And like, you give one of our guys 2 hours to do it. I don't feel like that's pertinent, but the town can train someone, the town can contract with someone, okay, or the landlord can do their inspection. All right. I typically tell people the landlord should manage this. Okay. They should steer the boat because I've had to reinspect properties that someone else failed. And I wouldn't have failed them. Okay. Again, it's a nail hole. It's a water stain. I say this because you just see it more. You're swimming in this pool and you know what to look for. And people who don't, they tend to be a little more aggressive in failing people for it. So if you're saying you have a rental and the town's saying I need this lead safe cert, the cert says it's the cert. It's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. There's not a whole lot of wording on it, but in the center of it, it says good for 3 years, and it also says to be affixed to the lease. Like those are like two major things that are in there. For someone to say it needs to be done sooner is an incorrect interpretation of the law.
Thank you. So, can you just share some of the best practices for our agents and property owners and buyers when it comes to safety and lead-based paint in New Jersey?
Well, let me tell you this. We had a client where we inspected the property. It's a rental. He was selling it and he failed. All right. So we, basically you hire us, you sign our contract, you pay it, we do it, it failed, and we notify him that he failed, he had to fix it, right? Well, unbeknownst to us, he sold the house, right? The new person's like, oh, I rehabbed it and I want to rent it, and the town's asking for the lead safe cert. Do you have it? I'm like, no, it failed. I'm like, how did this happen? Right? He's like, well, I figured I was just going to get it, and the realtor said, well, we got your paid invoice. And I'm like, okay, but I mean, you had a 50%, it could fail. And I said, he did fail. He knew he failed and he sold it. And they're like, do we have any recourse? The law says the owner is responsible. So the new owner is responsible. Now we go into the sales contract. You know a lot about sales contracts, right? Do any of them say you must provide a lead safe cert for rental properties? No. When I say don't at all, none of them do. The law is too new and even the attorneys aren't wise enough to put into the contract saying you're responsible for obtaining this. Because let me tell you, I have some older properties that are constantly failing. Like every inspection has failed because it's so old and there's so many coats of paint in this historic town. I'm not going to get into it. So, I mean, it's very valuable to have that lead safe cert because you know that the property can be in a lead safe condition. Okay. Like this house, the windows were all painted shut. And this elderly woman who lived there took a paint scraper and scraped all the windows so she could open them. Feisty woman. But the paint was it looked like a Wolverine. It's like scratched all the windows. I'm like, you failed. Okay. Now, that is for your transactions to know that you're better off having it because it's valuable because it could fail. And if it fails, there's a reinspection fee. And if a property fails, you have to do wipe sampling. So there's an expense, okay, to not just fixing it, but for the reinspection that you could fail again and have to go back again. Okay. So that is that. For people living in a, someone renting it. I'm like, this law is there to be protective of you. Okay. So when you have a lead safe cert, you know that a licensed inspector has gone through and done that. Look, you can hire someone to do a mold inspection. There's no licensing for mold inspections in New Jersey. So am I going to trust someone who has a lead license? Yeah, I would, because um, they can lose the license if they lie, but they're more qualified. Like for me to renew my license and I let it expire like an idiot, right? Like it was 40-hour class. People were lead poisoned in there. And you got to take 2 exams. You got to take off your glasses. You basically have to strip down to make sure you don't have anything. And you sit at this desk to take this computer module. And there's 2 of them. And you have to do them in these testing centers. It's a kind of a pain in the butt to do, I got to tell you. So you're getting some level of service. All right. Now, let's say you have someone who's buying a property who disclosed there's lead. Okay. Maybe they did testing and there's lead on all the trim, or these 2 rooms they didn't renovate. Or maybe it's one of the bedrooms. What do you say to them? Well, I said, if the paint's in good shape, it's not really going to be a hazard. Like, well, we're going to have young kids. And I'm like, well, maybe you don't want to have the kids use the room that has lead in it. Maybe you want to put them take the hazard away, put them into another room. Okay. And someone says, well, I might renovate. Well, you're going to have to hire a renovation repair contractor to manage it so you're not exposing it. Like if you're aware of the hazard, like who doesn't like bacon? Unless you're a vegetarian, I guess. Even vegetarians, I'm sure, would love bacon. If you gave it to them, they'd be like, oh my God, this bacon's amazing. So much better than broccoli, right? So you can't eat bacon every day. You know it's not good for you. Okay. Knowing that damaged lead paint is not good for you is a step in the right direction. It's the whole point of this law is to create people's awareness of it so they can manage it. Look, those Stanley cups that people were talking about, some of them had a little lead solder in them. There was a Disney cup that had like a rubber bottom to it, right? And if the rubber bottom fell off, the very bottom solder piece, because it was made overseas, had lead in it. Okay. So I tell people it's really their exposure, pathway. Like if someone says this house is really old and I'm going to renovate it, and I'm like, well, if you don't do it legally and properly, you're going to create a major lead hazard because the dust is going to wind up everywhere, and it's going to, you're not going to. Who goes in the basement and cleans like the ductwork and everything? Like it's going to get places. It's going to be in the place. So that's why it never really kind of took off after asbestos boom, because it's very tedious and expensive to do, and most people don't want to go that route. Now, I would say people call me up and they want me to do a lead inspection of property they're buying, and it's money in our pocket. And I say, don't hire me. It has lead. Call me when you want to renovate, okay? And then we can talk realistically, because you're gonna freak out over. Look, I got a phone call the other day from California, from the fires, because as much as you see the winds blowing everything out, the people to the north and south are smelling it, and they're telling people to wear masks, and there's asbestos in the air because these houses are burning down. There's asbestos in them, and asbestos doesn't burn, it stays airborne, and they're asking about like air quality, and they're saying wear masks outside to keep the windows closed and run your HVAC system to filter everything, because there's a hazard going on right now, and they're saying this is what you should do. And you always have people who like go to the umpteenth level saying, well, is there anything else I could be doing? You know? So when it comes to lead, you have to expect it's going to have it. And I can send you the slide. It was from HUD, and it's nationally, and it's like anything built for like 1940, 90% chance. And it starts to filter and shrink down as you approach the 70s. And then it kind of stopped like in 78, So knowing that it's, 78 or newer, you're not going to come across it, sure. But I mean, you can't look, I have lead paint in my house, I have asbestos in my house. I don't really care because I know where it is and I'm not going to disturb it. If I am going to disturb it, I'm going to manage it. And this is someone who deals with hazards. Okay. Again, when I told you, I think lead is really bad for it, and radon, because you can't, and down the shore, you're not really going to have radon, quite frankly, but you're going to have a bunch of crazy people from Pennsylvania that have high radon levels concerned about it. But if you can't taste it or smell it and you're being exposed to it, it's pretty bad. Most people get depressed after I talk. That makes you feel any better.
No, no, not at all. We have plenty of energy for knowledge at Farley and Ferry, and thank you so much for letting the way and shedding light on these important lead rules in New Jersey, and the process of obtaining a lead base certificate for anyone who's interested in renting, buying, selling, or renovating homes built prior to 1978. It is crucial to understand these regulations to ensure the safety of all our residents. If you have more questions or need additional guidance in lead safety, in your real estate transactions, drop any comments below and reach out to our expert directly, David of Curren Environmental. His contact information, of course, will be available in the description below. Don't forget to follow us for more tips in our Ask the Expert series. Let us know what you'd like to hear about, and we're here for you at Farley&Ferry, bringing expert advice routinely. David, thank you so much. We're thrilled to work with you and recommend you, and we appreciate all your expertise today.
For those of you still awake, I appreciate being here.